There's a specific kind of person who flinches when someone pulls out a phone at dinner. Not because they're hiding something, not because they're insecure in the way people assume. They just have this immediate, almost physical reaction to being photographed, and they've spent years being told they're vain or weird, or have low self-esteem because of it. But psychologists have been looking at this more closely, and what they're finding is genuinely interesting. The people who hate being photographed often have something specific going on cognitively that the rest of us don't really talk about. So today we're going to explore what makes them interesting from a psychological perspective. First thing you need to understand is that camera aversion isn't one thing. It looks like one behavior from the outside, but underneath it there are at least 3 different psychological mechanisms running, and most people who hate photos are dealing with some combination of all of them. The cultural assumption is that these people are just vain or fishing for compliment. But research on self-perception suggests something much stranger is happening. Their brain is essentially running 2 different versions of themselves at once, and the camera forces those 2 versions to collide. Let me explain. There's a concept in psychology called self-concept clarity. It's basically how clearly and consistently you understand who you are internally. People with high self-concept clarity have a strong, detailed internal model of themselves. They know how they think, how they feel, how they show up in the world. And here's the catch. The clearer your internal self-image, the more jarring it is when you see an external version that doesn't match. A study published in the Journal of Personality and Social Psychology found that people with highly developed internal self-concepts often experience what researchers call self-discrepancy distress when confronted with external representations of themselves. So that flinch when someone shows you a photo of yourself, that's not vanity. That's your brain registering a mismatch between the person you experience yourself as and the person the camera captured. The two don't line up, and the gap creates real psychological discomfort. But here's where it gets messy. The people most likely to have this experience aren't the ones with low self-esteem. They're the ones with high internal self-awareness. Counterintuitive, right? Research on metacognition, which is basically thinking about your own thinking, shows that highly self-aware people have more detailed, more nuanced internal self-models than average. And the more detailed your internal model, the harder it is for any single photograph to feel accurate. And there's another layer to this that nobody really talks about. It has to do with memory. There's research on something called the photo-taking impairment effect, where people who take photos of an experience often remember the experience worse than people who just lived it. The brain offloads the memory to the camera and stops encoding it deeply. So for some camera-averse people, photos aren't just uncomfortable in the moment. They feel like they're competing with the actual memory. You ever look at a photo from a meaningful event and feel like the photo has slowly replaced your real memory of it? That's not just a feeling. That's document. Psychologists call it memory displacement, and people with strong autobiographical memory tend to be more sensitive to it. They don't want photos because they don't want the photo version to overwrite the felt version. The image becomes the memory, and something real gets lost in the trade. Now, let's talk about something that explains a lot of the social friction. We live in a culture where being photographed constantly is treated as the default. Refusing it gets read as weird, as antisocial, as having something to hide. But psychologically, there's a concept called the spotlight effect. It's the tendency to overestimate how much other people are noticing you. Most people experience a mild version of camera-averse people often experience a pretty intense version. And here's the thing. Photos amplify it dramatically, because once a photo exists, it can be shared, judged, and revisited indefinitely. For someone whose nervous system already runs hot on social attention, a photograph isn't just a record. It's potential exposure. A moment that could be looked at by anyone, at any time, in any mood, forever. That's not paranoia. That's just an accurate read on what photographs actually do now. And brains that take social information seriously are going to react to that reality more strongly than brains that don't. But here's what's fascinating. Despite all this, camera-averse people often have rich inner lives, deep relationships, and incredibly detailed memory. They're not avoiding documentation because they don't value the moment. They're avoiding it because they value the moment too much to let it be flattened. They want to remember the wedding, not the photo of the wedding. They want to remember the trip, not the version of the trip they curated for Instagram. There's actually research suggesting that people who consume their own photos heavily can develop a strange form of dissociation from their lived experience. The self in the photo becomes more familiar than the self who lived the moment. It's a subtle kind of self-alienation, and the people who instinctively resist photos might be protecting themselves themselves from it without quite knowing why. Their gut knew before their cognition caught up. And there's this paradox at the core of the camera-averse psychology. They're often the people most attuned to how they're perceived, and that's exactly why they don't want to be photographed. Not because they don't care how they look, because they care about something deeper. They care about the gap between how they're seen in a frozen frame and who they actually are when no one's looking. They're not running from the camera. They're running from being misrepresented by it. The cultural conversation about this tends to flatten it into vanity or insecurity, as if not wanting to be photographed is just a confidence problem you can therapy your way out of. But what's actually going on is often the opposite. It's not that they don't have a strong sense of self. It's that they have such a strong sense of self that no single photograph can contain it. The discomfort isn't fragility, it's specificity. It's a brain that knows itself well enough to know what's missing. If you're someone who hates being photographed, you've probably been told for years that you should just get over it, that you're being difficult, that you're ruining the moment for everyone else who wants the picture. And maybe in some situations, sure, you can push through it, but you should also know that what you're experiencing is real. You're not broken. You're not vain. You're not insecure in the way people assume. You're just someone whose internal self-model is detailed enough that a single image can't carry the weight of who you actually are. There's something almost old-fashioned about, in a world that documents everything, refusing documentation is a quiet kind of rebellion. You're insisting that some moments belong to you, that some versions of you exist only in memory, that not every experience needs to be flattened into a shareable artifact. That's not avoidance, that's a position. And it's a more sophisticated position than the culture usually gives it credit for. So the next time someone pulls out their phone and you feel that flinch, you don't have to fight it. You don't have to explain it. You don't have to apologize for it. Your brain is just doing what brains with high self-awareness do when they're asked to be reduced to a single frame. The discomfort isn't the problem. The discomfort is information. It's telling you something about how you experience yourself, and it's worth listening to. If this resonated with you, I'd really appreciate you subscribing. And if you want to help me keep making content like this, consider becoming a channel member. Your support genuinely means a lot. I've got some other videos queued up that I think you'll connect with. Different topics, but the same kind of depth. I'll see you in the next one.